much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this Honorable House will recall my statement on April 24, 2018, informing of the implications of the United States sanctions on the United Company Rusal, UC Rusal, for Jamaica's bauxite and alumina industry. The wider economy and the range of actions that were being pursued by the Ministry of Transport and Mining in collaboration with other entities within the government of Jamaica to limit any negative impacts on Jamaica's economy. Mr. Speaker, much of the information that I presented then was worrying. I was very concerned, especially since the sanctions seemed set to retard the recovery of the bauxite and alumina industry that the government had worked hard to engineer. At the time, it appeared highly probable that more than 1,000 workers and contractors would have been made unemployed and a further 15,000 persons negatively impacted, including the town of Yuatan, St. Catherine, and adjoining communities that were associated with UC Rusal's investment in bauxite mining, alumina manufacturing, port operations, and agriculture. Today, Mr. Speaker, I speak to the House from a more positive position than I did in April 2018. I have good news. Before I present this good news, Mr. Speaker, I wish Parliament to recall that on April 6, 2018, the United States Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, via General License Number 14, imposed various sanctions on Mr. Oleg Deripaska and several companies that were wholly or primarily owned by him. Of primary concern to Jamaica were the sanctions that had been imposed on UC Rusal, which owns and operates West Indies Alumina Company, Windalco, in Jamaica. Parliament will recall that UC Rusal is the world's second largest alumina producer. As we are aware, Windalco owns and operates the alumina works in Yuatan, St. Catherine. Mr. Speaker, Parliament will recall that the sanctions resulted in the assets of UC Rusal that were within the U.S. jurisdiction being frozen and persons being prohibited from having dealings with them. Further, non-U.S. persons could face secondary sanctions for knowingly facilitating significant transactions for and on behalf of Mr. Deripaska and his companies. Mr. Speaker, significant efforts were made by the government of Jamaica towards mitigating the effects of the sanctions on the people, the government, and the economy. At a first step, the Ministry of Transport and Mines technical team, including the Mines and Geology Division, the Jamaica Bauxite Institute, and the Jamaica Bauxite Mining Company, were fully mobilized and actively monitored and analyzed developments relating to the sanctions. We had several meetings with UC Rusal's country manager to enable him to convey the government of Jamaica's positions to Moscow and for his company to inform the government of Jamaica of their plans for Windalco. I also met with the Russian ambassador to Jamaica. Briefing and strategy meetings were held with representatives of the U.S. Embassy in Kingston, unions representing the Windalco workers, the Attorney General's Office, the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, and all the mining agencies, as well as constant contact with my opposition counterpart. The Jamaican Embassy was also fully briefed. Throughout the Ministry of Transport and Mining and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, applications were made to the relevant U.S. authorities for waivers to conduct business with UC Rusal. These were with a view to sustaining the operations of Windalco towards preserving the livelihood of the citizens and preventing any major fallout for the economy. A formal response was received from OFAC, which stated that Jamaica was covered by General License 14 and would not be the direct subject of sanctions. Mr. Speaker, the government of Jamaica also applied to OFAC for a specific license as a safeguard in the event that General License 14 should expire without the sanctions being lifted against UC Rusal. That application was to ensure that the government of Jamaica and the Jamaican economy would not be impacted by any of the U.S. imposed sanctions, including secondary sanctions. Mr. Speaker, in December 2018, the President of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, indicated his intention to lift the sanctions and that his administration had imposed on UC Rusal. This House will recall that various interested parties, including several national governments, had registered strong concerns about the sanctions, especially their negative impacts on industrial activities and employment in the affected countries. The House will also recall that the sanctions severely disrupted the global aluminum market and sent aluminum prices higher. The U.S. President's statement was made ahead of the introduction of General License 14D on December 7, 2018, which noted that the sanctions had initially been imposed on April 6 were set to expire on January 12, 2019. Following the announcement and the introduction of General License 14D, OFAC officially notified the U.S. Congress on December 19, 2018, that it intended to lift the sanctions on UC Rusal. General License 14D was replaced and superseded in its entirety by General License 14E on January 12, 2019. This new instrument was set to expire on January 28, 2019. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to inform Parliament and the nation that on Sunday, January 27, 2019, the U.S. government, via the Department of Treasury, announced that as of that date, January 27, 2019, the sanction on UC Rusal had been lifted. This, Mr. Speaker, is positive news for the government and people of Jamaica. It is positive news for Windalco and its over 1,000 employees who had faced an uncertain future when the sanctions were initially announced. It is positive news for Jamaican companies and individuals that conduct business with Windalco. It is indeed positive news for the economy. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, independent persons will control a significant block of the shares of EN Plus, the UC Rusal's parent company. UC Rusal has also agreed to unprecedented transparency in its operations by undertaking extensive ongoing auditing, certification, and reporting requirements. Mr. Speaker, for those to whom it may be of interest, the U.S. government has informed that all sanctions imposed on UC Rusal's majority owner then, Mr. Deripaska, remains in force. Mr. Speaker, I wish to place on record our appreciation to the Most Honorable Prime Minister for his timely intervention in this matter. The Prime Minister, at a critical point when all looked bleaky, had a very productive meeting with the U.S. Treasury Secretary. This meeting, along with the help of the U.S. Congressional Black Caucus, Congressman Inglis, and many others, contributed to the lifting of the sanctions. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank my colleague ministers in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, and the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Ambassador Audrey Marks and the team at the Embassy in Washington, the union and workers, and all other persons and entities for their assistance in lobbying Jamaica's case to the United States. These collective efforts have influenced the lifting of the sanctions. I wish the members of the House to note that arising from the lifting of the U.S. sanctions, entities in Jamaica can freely do business with Windalco without the threat of direct or secondary sanctions. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.